So President Trump has reportedly expressed some interest in purchasing the island of Greenland, which has since 1814 been controlled by the Danes. Now, this proposal got an incredulous reaction from a lot of people on Twitter last night, and it does sound pretty funny and out of left field for President Trump to suddenly propose buying this giant sheet of ice floating in the ocean. But many people forget that under that deep sheet of ice there actually is an island. And of course, given President Trump's history in the real estate market, it is kind of easy to make a lot of jokes about his next great real estate deal. And however, as ridiculous as it may seem, were the U.S. to actually purchase Greenland, it wouldn't be that bad of an investment, considering that it is a massive island that is largely unpopulated at this point. Greenland is actually the largest island in the entire world. That is, if you count Australia as a continent and not an island itself. Greenland is not nearly as big as Australia, but it's pretty darn big, and there's nobody there. Greenland has a population of under 60,000 at this point, and that's pretty hard for me to put into perspective for such a massive landmass to have such a little population, because, that is an order of magnitude smaller of a population than the county that I currently reside in. 55,000 people is a small town in America. And that's the entirety of the population of this massive landmass sitting in the North Atlantic. And interestingly enough, Trump is not the first president to ever consider purchasing Greenland for the U.S. It also was apparently kicked around by President Truman, who offered the Danes about $100 million, and that's from the Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate. I haven't heard that anywhere else, but they're reporting it for now. And also there were, back in the days of westward expansion and Manifest Destiny, there was a lot of talk of the U.S. expanding to all sorts of territories, such as, the rest of Mexico and perhaps also Greenland and, all the Caribbean islands. So it's not a new idea. Now, with that said, I still do think that this is a bit of an absurd story because it is rather unlikely that this would ever happen, even if Trump really, really wanted it to happen, and if he could somehow get Congress to appropriate the necessary funds to purchase the island. One, I don't think the Danes would agree to sell, and two, even if the Danes agreed to sell, I think they'd have trouble trying to get rid of the island because they gave it, autonomy back in I think it was the late 70s. And there's actually a significant independence movement within the country. That seems to me, just glancing at the roster of the parties in Parliament, that most of the seats in Parliament are held by pro-independence parties. So it's probably more likely that rather than Denmark being able to pawn off Greenland, that they would just simply achieve full independence. With that said, however, perhaps the Danes would be more open to making a deal because they'd rather, instead of having Greenland go independent and then the Danes getting nothing for it, perhaps they'd rather take the U.S.'s money and then let the U.S. try and deal with keeping the country subdued, which, of course, with a population of only 55,000, that wouldn't be too difficult. Now, would it be ethical? Absolutely not. You'd be essentially invading someone else's country and taking away their natural resources and their history and their culture, and you'd have to essentially wipe them off the map. The way that you would subdue a Greenland independence movement is by essentially just flooding the country with American settlers who would very quickly outnumber the natives. There's only 55,000 people there. Now, a good portion of those I should point out, are not the descendants of Danish colonists or anything. They are mostly, from looking at the people of Greenland, they seem to be a mix of Inuits and Europeans, because Inuits and Europeans, from what I understand, had both colonized the island over a number of centuries and sort of lived together. I think it was the Norse that actually got there first before the Inuits, but both populations seem to have been around for centuries and centuries on that giant island, and they seem to have pretty pretty closely intermingled by this point. So it's interesting that the Danes, since taking control of Greenland in 1814, really haven't settled any people there. There are very few, if you can consider how long the Danes have held on to Greenland. The more Danish people didn't move there. It's quite remarkable. Now, the reason for that is probably just because it's so darn cold there that very few people would want to leave Denmark, which is already pretty cold as far as I'm concerned, and go to Greenland, which is, a sheet of ice. However, back in, I believe it was the medieval warm period, there are plenty of historical accounts of, the Vikings farming in Greenland, and actually, the place looking green, as the name would imply, rather than looking like a place that should be called Iceland. It's quite ironic that Iceland is now colder than Greenland. Given how old the names are, it would seem, one would think that at some point Greenland was greener than Iceland is now. And if all of the lefties are right about the apocalyptic global warming and how fast the Earth's about to heat up and that everything's going to get warmer, well, then Greenland's going to be a great place to move to. Because think about it, when that ice thaws, you'll have all those millions and millions of square miles. Actually, it's not millions. Thousands and thousands of square miles that will open up and be perfect for settlement. So whoever controls Greenland at that time will have a great opportunity on their hands, and will certainly see the value of their investments in that what is now essentially worthless real estate go up more than I could ever imagine. I mean, that really would be the real estate deal of the millennium. If, in fact, global warming is as apocalyptic as folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would lead us to believe. And on that note, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.